Morning, everyone. It's Friday, November 22nd. I'm John Weigell with Mark Dent, and this is the Hustle Daily Show. TGI Fridays was once on top of the world, generating $2 billion in annual revenue and restaurant chain dominance in the 80s and 90s. So how did they go from that to closing multiple restaurants and being knee-deep in bankruptcy right now? We'll get to that in a minute, but first, let's give you the news in business and tech. To start us off, Nvidia has been all over the news, so I had to talk about them today, and for a very good reason. The company has greatly exceeded expectations after some overheating concerns for their Blackwell chip. Nvidia has now more than doubled its profit and increased revenue by 94%. Pretty sure Wall Street will remain very calm over all of this information. Next, well, this is completely unexpected, but U.S. unemployment benefit applications reportedly fell last week to the lowest they've been since April. Initial claims went down by 6,000 to a total of 213,000 in the week ended November 16th. From there, we hop on to big tech. Meta is leveling up its messenger app to compete with the likes of Google Meet, Zoom, and FaceTime. The company is adding features including HD video calling, noise suppression, AI backgrounds, voice message capabilities, and more. Mark, will you be actively using your Facebook Messenger for work meetings from now on? Just let me know.
Yeah, we'll hop on that later, actually. But I get why Meta is doing this because they do have, billions of users. And so there's no reason why they can't try to literally do everything.
Yeah.
But that said, people are very stuck in their ways when it comes to, I feel like, voice calls. Mm-hmm. And it usually has more to do with the company you work for rather than what you actually choose. You know, some people have Teams, some have Zoom, and that's no choice of anyone's own. I mean, I tend to use Google Meet when I schedule meetings because it's just the easiest for me.
It's right there.
But so I could see it potentially working for people in that situation who are just like, okay, I have Messenger, but it just doesn't seem like a professional way of doing things. So to me, like the only one they're really going to compete with is FaceTime. Mm-hmm. They're just going to have to really set themselves apart with this product, I think, because, this isn't like where Facebook or /Meta is trying to one up a smaller competitor. They're trying to literally one up the other giant, and that's extremely difficult.
Yeah, it seems like they really got to pick a lane, right? You have Zoom and Teams. For more like professional settings, you have FaceTime. I mean, even Meta has WhatsApp video calls already. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that's their big FaceTime competitor, at least if you're talking to somebody internationally that doesn't have an iPhone. Mm-hmm. That's the big one to go to. And also, another platform, Signal, just last week announced that it would have video calling capabilities. So as what you said, very crowded space. And it seems like they really need to pick a niche of this. Is it going to be a casual friend type thing? Or is it going to be a professional thing? Are they going to have packages for big companies? Remains to be seen. So I completely agree. They got to do one thing and do it well.
Yeah, just wow me, give me something really cool. All that metaverse stuff, perhaps that can be incorporated. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like they've maybe given up on half of that, so whatever.
You can call people with the Ray-Bans glasses and, there's something there. Yeah. Next, continuing with more big tech, Google may have to kiss Chrome goodbye. The DOJ asked the judge in its antitrust case against Google to essentially make the company sell its Chrome browser. So Chrome is essential to Google's search dominance, and if it's sold, competitors could have quite a field day in search. So we'll see what happens there. And finally, you might have heard McDonald's is bringing back the McRib, of course, but they're also trying to bring back the word of the year, which is value. The company plans to launch a new McValue initiative that'll extend the $5 meal deal that debuted a few months ago into the first half of 2025. So they're really running with that $5 deal into the new year, hoping that they can increase their customer base yet again. And talking about restaurants, TGIF, thank God it's Friday, because today we're talking about the decline of TGI Fridays, a restaurant chain that was once really on top of the world and is now kind of down in the dumps a bit. So, Mark, let's start off with maybe some positive over here before we dive into the negative. Are you a TGI Fridays guy? Do you like it there? You been?
I've been, and not in a long time, honestly. I was more Applebee's growing up.
Yes.
Chili's to a lesser extent. But what about you? Were you a TGI Fridays guy?
I went a few times. I think I would really, really base my going to Fridays on whether they had the $10 unlimited apps. And if they didn't have that, I wouldn't go. But yeah, that was pretty much the way that they got me there most of the time.
Yeah, like the good deals.
Yeah.
But I am a fan of like the lore of TGI Fridays. I still remember this from like the early days of the social internet. There was like a really good interview that the founder, Alan Stillman, did with Edible Geography, like 14, 15 years ago. Alan Stillman, by the way, is a pretty well-known restaurateur. He founded Smith & Wollensky, the really famous steakhouse in New York City as well. But anyway, before that, he founded TGI Fridays in like the mid-1960s on the Upper East Side. And as hard as it is to believe, because of, the way we think of TGI Fridays now, it was truly revolutionary. Mm-hmm. As Stillman kind of explained in this interview, he says like at that time, when women wanted to go out and have a good time, they'd usually just have to like hang out at people's apartments. There'd be cocktail parties, things of that nature. But when he opened TGI Fridays, it kind of like changed the scene because it became a singles bar where men and women would go together. Whereas previously at some of these other type of bars, it would just be men, men having drinks.
Yeah.
This was like where the two worlds met. It was about the same time The Pill came out. And it just was this humongous sensation that he said spawned dozens of other similar bars in New York City. Of course, then TGI Fridays ended up becoming a chain and a franchise. Stillman kind of got out of the business after a few years. But he says that things kind of started to change for TGI Fridays when it started to expand into like the Sunbelt cities. And this is like really fascinating because, New York, obviously a much more happening place than almost anywhere, but just the way that the urbanism was in these cities where it was like the suburbs, people didn't walk, they didn't whatever. So you had just these families starting to drive, the architecture changed, everything changed.
Right.
And it sort of naturally became this family dining establishment instead.
Yeah, which is really fascinating how that happened over the course of time. And, like an establishment like Smith & Wollensky, which he also founded, is still there and it's still, kicking, and it's just a nice steak restaurant. And that really hasn't expanded that much over the course of the United States and internationally. However, Fridays completely exploded. It was so popular at the time when it came out, and it kind of had a boom in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But the past 20 years, it's been kind of facing more issues as more chain restaurants have popped up, and especially since the pandemic, where a bunch of restaurants got hit real bad, and they're one of them.
Oh, for sure. And as you had mentioned, like filed for bankruptcy earlier this month. And a lot of that was because of the COVID-19 pandemic and just that extra competition. And so, filing for bankruptcy, this isn't like a death sentence, though, necessarily. Right. It can have a lot of different sort of meanings when restaurants especially file for this. But I mean, what it actually means is that TGI Fridays had already closed about 36 corporate-owned restaurants, and it's going to continue to run roughly 40 more corporate-owned restaurants across the U.S. There are obviously like hundreds more franchises throughout the U.S. probably. They can do their thing. Like the bankruptcy doesn't necessarily involve them at all. However, it does likely portend bad things are potentially going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
or that
sure.
They've already happened, that everyone is kind of struggling.
It's not a great forecast for the future. And one of my favorite tidbits from this Business Insider article is that there are apparently $50 million floating around in unused TGI Fridays gift cards, which is just an insane number to just throw out there. So if you're listening and you got a TGI Fridays gift card, get out there and use it just in case, because they are planning to go through to next year, and they did close a bunch of restaurants this year, but they're doing it. We talked about the pandemic and, other companies like Red Lobster having problems and also declaring bankruptcy. But another kind of big reason for this refusal to pivot seems to be that they're backed and owned by a PE firm or a few PE firms right now, which seems to just kind of be a weird death knell for a lot of restaurant brands right now.
Behind every bankruptcy announcement lies a private equity firm, John, or at least pretty much. It certainly feels that way. Obviously, that was the case with Red Lobster. There have been some other restaurant chains that have had private equity type of backing that have also had some struggles. This is just reality, though. Jersey Mike's just got bought out by Blackstone, which is like, in some ways hilarious. But that's just how it is. And I don't know. There's a world, I think, where the different kind of entities that purchase these restaurants become savvier. But the whole sort of model for those types of entities is to like cut and to slim down. And so maybe this bankruptcy is sort of a way of doing that. Obviously, TGI Fridays wouldn't have probably got bought by the private equity backers that it got purchased by if it had been in great financial shape to begin with, right?
Sure.
A few years ago. But all that considered, like, it just comes down to this. TGI Fridays was incredible in the 1960s, as we discussed. Then it kind of had this life as like a family restaurant for a whole nother generation. That's a really long time.
It is.
It's been very popular for our entire lives, for most of our parents' entire lives. And it's really hard to stay relevant for a long time, especially when you have plenty of other restaurants that are just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And then younger people like us, we want to go out to eat at non-chain type of restaurants.
Sure.
And if it is a chain, then we prefer fast casual for the most part.
Right.
So there's just too much, I think, going against TGI Fridays. And, Chili's is a slight exception because it's done pretty well this year. But weirdly, that's in part because they've raised their prices. Most restaurants, McDonald's, TGI Fridays, et cetera, have struggled from inflation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, Chili's, they've raised their menu prices a little bit, and that's a big reason why they've made more money.
Yeah, I mean, Chili's, their social media has really popped off the last year or two. And Fridays, yeah, it's just a cocktail of issues with, this whole PE firm acquisition. Also, just people, as you mentioned, as the generations taste changing, people not really wanting that environment anymore. Applebee's also isn't doing too hot right now, so that familiarity is kind of tanking them, unfortunately. But they really had their time. And I don't know, there could be some ways that they could potentially pivot, change their business, try something new. Nothing like that has really worked for them so far, but considering that they're not really down and out yet, we may have not seen the last of them.
Yeah, and no one wants to hear this who works in the restaurant industry, but so much of it is luck. It doesn't sound like that's like great groundbreaking analysis here, but it's just so true. Chili's, like you said, social media. They got big on TikTok because of some of the menu items they're offering. I mean, sure, you can try to do that, but you can't just engineer that type of social media craze. And if TGI Fridays had that, we might be talking about Chili's having like a really rough 2024 if they hadn't just caught the luck of the algorithm and some really fun 20-somethings who decided that it was cool.
True. Yeah, no luck for Fridays, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Happy Friday to you, though, Mark.
You too, and to all of our listeners.
All right, and that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor is Robert Hartwig. Our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a ton more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, go get signed up at thehustle.co/email and follow us on Instagram at The Hustle Daily. We will see you Monday, everybody.